Welcome back. It's exactly 8:35. This is News and Views on Salam Media, and we now are going to be looking at the preference for an ANC-DA-MPC coalition. And we're going to be talking with Research Director of the Brenthurst Foundation, Ray Hartley. Ray, a very good morning to you. Welcome to the program.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for having me on.
Okay, so I understand that your foundation, the Brenthurst Foundation, has conducted a survey, and it wasn't done directly by you. It was commissioned through another company. Let's talk about the sample size of the survey and what was the findings. When I look at the indications of the finding, I'm just thinking to myself, oh, goodness me, we are going to let the cat amongst the pigeons, aren't we, regarding MK's response to the results of the survey?
Yeah, and I think the results of surveys in South Africa are always controversial and always lead to all kinds of recriminations. But we're very confident in our survey because we did several in the lead up to the election. And our final survey in February correctly predicted that the MK party would be larger than Julius Malema's EFF and that the ANC would get around 40%. Our prediction was 39%. So we have some confidence. No survey is perfect. There's a margin of error. But if you look at the survey result, I think it's pretty clear where the preference lies. And, you know, there's no getting away from the facts. You know, as soon as we ended up in coalition country after the election with the ANC at 40%, we said, let's find out what people actually think about this. Because, you know, conversations are often guided by the noise that you find on social media, and that's often out of touch.
Okay, before we continue with this discussion, let's understand the role of the Brenthurst Foundation.
Yeah, so we're essentially an economic and political policy advice organization. We do a lot of work in Africa. It's quite unusual for us to be so South Africa focused, but because of this big election, we decided that we would pay a lot of attention to it. So we work across the continent. We've worked all over with governments and sometimes with oppositions. And our goal essentially is to try and get economic growth going. I think the biggest crisis on the continent is the marginalization of youth and the fact that there are so few opportunities for young people on the continent to get into employment. So we focus a lot on economic growth. We try not to be ideological about it. It's more what works for a particular country. Some countries need bigger, more powerful states. Some countries need smaller, less aggressive states. There's no one-size-fits-all solution. So we typically work by spending a lot of time in a country and researching, and then coming up with what we think are some of the things that could be done to improve. So in South Africa, we're really focused on, I mean, the outcome that we would like to see from this election is something that will lead to kickstarting this economy, which has been stuck for a long time, and somehow addressing this massive jobs problem that South Africa has, which I think is a cause potentially for future instability.
You spoke about the work you do in the rest of Africa, and the key words there was marginalization of the youth. That indicates that we here in South Africa are not unique to the rest of the continent, and that serious focus should be placed on this situation, because apart from the disillusionment of the youth, marginalization completely, of course, is one of the reasons why we have such a high crime rate in the country. And that does need to be addressed sooner rather than later. And if the ANC does go into this coalition with the DA, despite what other opposition parties like the MK might be saying, It is absolutely crucial at this stage in the life of South Africa to, as you've rightfully pointed out, to get the economy kick-started. If that doesn't happen, we're doomed. And what does that picture then look like?
Yeah, I think that, a lot of sort of people say, oh, this is all about big business. It's actually not about big business. It's about small business. I mean, a lot of South Africans are surviving day to day by hustling, doing small jobs, doing small retail work on the streets even, or in very small premises or from their homes, doing what they can do to survive. We think there's enormous entrepreneurial energy there amongst South Africans, but it's held back by the failure of the state really to give it the opportunity to grow, to remove the obstacles to businesses, small businesses, home businesses, to grow into businesses that are now formal and are situated in a shopping district. And maybe they would have more branches if they're successful, and they would hire more and more people. So entrepreneurship and getting the economy going on the ground is really the big solution. And I think this has not been understood properly by the ANC, which, has sort of looked at the economy as, oh, well, there's big business, there's labor, and, we need to sort of develop policies around that. I think that that's not where the jobs are going to come from. They're going to come from much smaller businesses on the ground, entrepreneurs.
Let me just shift the focus slightly. There has been a theory going around, you might have come across it as well. And the theory is that the UK and the US, particularly the US, has been complicit in the election results. So there is a suggestion that there's been vote rigging, and the MK and a few other smaller parties are obviously going to court. You must have heard the latest news regarding that issue. How do you, as the Brenthurst Foundation, view these type of allegations and theories?
Well, I think that, it's the correct approach is to go to court and ventilate these issues. And if there's any irregularities found, they must be addressed. And if they are substantial enough, yes, there can be questions about the overall election results. So far, I don't think anyone has produced evidence to back this up, but we'll see. So it's good that we're going into the court system. Let's see what comes out of that. My own view is that I don't think it's really possible to rig this election unless you have a mass conspiracy involving all the parties, basically, because there is party monitoring of voting at voting stations. There's monitoring of the counting. The party agents are all present. They verify the result. It's submitted to the National Centre. At the National Centre, all the parties are present. They verify that the correct result has come through, and then it goes on the board. So it's quite hard. Having monitored elections in Somaliland, in Kenya, in Liberia, in Lesotho, I think we have a pretty bulletproof system because we have the live vote tally. So that process from the polling station through to the live broadcast with the parties present at every stage ensures that you get a real-time result. A lot of election rigging requires a gap between the voting and the counting, as we saw in Kenya, where there were real questions about the election, because the Electoral Commission goes away after the election and sits in a room for 2-3 weeks, and some commissioners resign during the process, and then a result is announced, and everybody says it's not the right result. So we have those checks and balances. I think far worse a problem for South Africa is the declining participation. So, we talk about the youth and their marginalization. If only the youth would realize that for one day every 5 years, they have the power. There are more of them than us old people. And if they registered and voted, they would take power. But instead, they tend to go for apathy. They're not really inclined to get involved in voting, and then they become, the recipients of governance by people that don't properly represent their interests.
I want to go for an ad break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the different permutations of political coalitions. But before I do, you haven't responded to my question regarding the theory that the US was directly complicit in rigging the elections, how that was possible. I suppose there's ways and means if one does want to rig an election. Systems, technological systems are so sophisticated that anything is possible. Recently as well, I think just before or during the elections, Ambassador Brigady, the US ambassador to South Africa, was seen with a group of people, photographed with a group of government officials. And again, theorists, people were suggesting that that is proof that there is US meddling in our, in the elections. Do you think that that is very, very far-fetched, that we're just trying to hold on to and trying to point fingers that the election was rigged? There was also the situation that the system, the electronic system went down whilst the votes were being counted. There again are suggestions that that too was all planned and rigged in that way to then falsify the numbers. How do you see all of that?
Yeah, I think those are conspiracy theories. I don't really hold much store by those. I mean, the ambassadors of every country in the world are photographed with South Africa's government leaders. So depending on who you are, you can put any picture up of an ambassador with government leaders and say, what's going on here? It's the job of ambassadors to meet government leaders. So, it's not at all surprising that Ambassador Brigady would be seen with South African government officials, as would the Iranian ambassador. Did they rig the election? Well, what about the Russian ambassador? He's always photographed with the government officials. Did they rig the election? I don't really buy into those conspiracy theories. I think the system went down, and the system should not go down. I mean, you don't want that because it does make people, it gives fuel to these sorts of conspiracy theories. But if you look at the result prior to the system going down and post the system going down, it was utterly consistent. There was no bump for any party. No party lost dramatic number of votes. The MK party gained a lot of votes, but that's because they were, the way that areas, rural areas in KZN and so on were reporting, and the timing of that. So I don't really hold to any of those conspiracy theories.
Finally, people seem to have their hope on an ANC-DA coalition to restart, re-kick the economy and create jobs and other opportunities for young people to truly revive South Africa. If that doesn't happen, what do you believe would be the second and third scenarios? But very quickly, please, because we do need to wrap up.
Okay, now I think that it probably would be the best scenario economically, simply because the DA has demonstrated in the Western Cape that it can create jobs. It has some administrative experience. It's very good technocratically. So yes, I think it would help. I think the IFP would be a very good party to have in such an arrangement, because their policies are very job directed, very youth focused. I think the alternative would be really a minority government of the ANC, which would be very weak, because the MK party and the EFF have said they don't want to be in government at this point. Of course, they're politicians and they could change their minds. But so we're looking really at a minority government of the ANC, which would be a pretty precarious setup and subject to constant votes of no confidence.
Ray Hartley, Research Director of the Brenthurst Foundation, thank you indeed for your input on the show this morning. Interesting times. We're all waiting with bated breath to see what happens. So thank you indeed for your time. God bless. 8:50 News and Views moving along, and the president of Sahuk, Muaz Kasu, standing by to talk with us. So please don't go away.